Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Sanghaṃ Namassāmi. So, going to take my leave of the Sangha to say a few words on Dhamma this evening. Extend my greetings to the lay people. This is another, what we call one prat evening. A small uposatha, a small observance day. Not the full moon, not the new moon, it's the half moon. And as is the tradition to mark the passing of time then, conventionally speaking, we can call it September the 13th, I think, in terms of the phases of the moon. We're now into today's the eighth day of the waning moon. And so we mark time. Days go by, days and nights relentlessly passing. We're coming up for about three quarters the way through the rains retreat already. So it's pretty quick. 1 minute it's July and we're entering the rains, and boom, next minute October's around the corner. It's getting colder. We've made it through the heat, we've survived. Internally, we've hopefully learnt a few things. We've abandoned some unwholesome mental states, cultivated some wholesome ones, purified our minds a bit. In the monastery right now, it's a very nice little period. It's almost like a little interlude, this 2 weeks, where we've had, after this period, we're in what's called the rains residence, traditionally to spend the time in the monastery, but it's not absolutely mandatory to stay all the time. There are reasons where monks can travel. The Buddha allowed traveling for up to six nights, 7 days for a certain reason. And so it's considered appropriate to do certain activities. And some monks have just been for you could call it a nature trip, nature reflection, change of atmosphere, change of scene, to Yosemite. And those of us that stayed have had a very quiet week, just more or less keeping the place ticking over. In a couple of days, tomorrow some of us, and a couple of days others, will go up to Portland. It's another suitable reason for traveling, some kind of invitation for some kind of sangha or sasana related activity to support and encourage the faith of the lay people up there. So again, get a little bit of a change of scene, change of pace, and then a group will stay behind here and carry on looking after the monastery quietly. And then the last 2 weeks of the rains come back for our regular schedule, and then beyond. So time passes quickly, and we have to find ways to measure our time and to use it well, to balance it. One of the real skills of finding the middle way, just beginning with the externals, just getting it just right, so that we don't get too tense and we don't get too distracted. This middle way between the mind which is contracted and the mind which is distracted. So tonight I thought, just thinking this afternoon what I might say, I thought I'd just say a few words around one of my favorite topics of investigation, which is craving. Always an interesting one, always something to think about there. And then I've had a very privileged chance to have you could say an in-depth sneak preview at the Luang Chah biography, which is now, it's very much on its way. We received a mock-up of the actual physical copy today. It came to us from Thailand, just to see, and that'll be distributed in around about the new year when the real editions are out. But in going through it in great detail, there are many things which are really striking, and so without giving too much of it away, I can't really, it's 800 pages, so one or two little snippets which I think are really very fascinating and just sort of relevant, supportive for our practice, both monastics and lay people. But I'll first start on something that was triggered, this sort of, as you know, I'm sure you've experienced as well, little proliferations, like themes of investigation of Dhamma often get triggered by a statement somebody makes, or some kind of observation or some kind of interaction which you find thought-provoking or shocking or interesting. So this one I'll start with. A friend of mine came to visit over the weekend, very close childhood friend. We were at I think you call it junior school or middle school, so basically from the age of 10, 11, 12, 13 in England we were there together, 14, and then age 15 he moved over to the States because he's half American, and then finished his education here and has been working and living in the States for his adult life. But we remained in contact, and he's visited me in Thailand frequently, and came here a few years ago when I came, and so it's very sweet, as you know, to stay in touch with childhood friends, and there's always a kind of special feeling of kind of like a warmth, a bond which you have from your childhood. We all get a bit nostalgic. And so this friend of mine has been working in various different fields and has now just started working for a company called Google, which I'm sure you heard of, and you know more or less probably some of what it does, right? Not all of what it does. And so one of the interesting things he told me, he's just started, so he himself is finding out a lot about this particular thing. And he was telling me, it's quite a difficult time or challenging time in this whole field, because obviously there's a lot of criticism of being leveled at all these big companies and tech and social media and stuff. Quite right. He's fully aware of the reasons why. So he told me something which was really fascinating, which shocked him. He said to me, did you know, and this is kind of one of the things that people are kind of finding out about and getting shocked about. He said, did you know that in the milliseconds between when you Google something, like when you do a search for a web page or a website, in the milliseconds before that website comes up on your screen, that straight away there's like an online algorithm based or fueled bidding process takes place amongst the advertising companies for the right to give you or to send you the first advert, and for the right to be your. So that just takes place in an absolute split second, and so because all your information is more or less being sold to them, and then they then bid for the right, and then the highest bidder then gets to you, if you like, and based on all the information that's being given them and about you or about us, then they get to propose various options, enticing, interesting options to us, which we then may or may not act upon. So it's like, wow, yeah, that's the world we live in. That's kind of amazing. But in a sense, we're kind of getting used to it now, I think. Partly because that's kind of bit how it works, and more and more of these little snippets or tidbits of information come out, and it's like, that's shocking. But in a sense, what can you do? So it's partly the speed of it all, and the sort of sense that we're not, we're being manipulated, but it's also based on our choices. So it's not some kind of external manipulation. We're very much involved. So it's like, okay. For me, as somebody who's not really involved and doesn't do any shopping or this kind of thing anyway, it's not really relevant. Don't really mind. I never get adverts or never really feel it personally. So I always think now, whenever I hear something like that the question is not really like, is it right or is it wrong, or what do I think about it? But the point is this, is that ultimately this comes from us. This isn't somebody out there or something out there. This is essentially the product of the human mind creating a system, even if it's ultimately computers and things happening at light speed. Basically it's us, it's people just like us, no different to us, creating these things and putting it together, thinking about it, coming from the human mind, exactly the same human mind that I have. And so it's significant because it's the same, I'm going through the same process myself, but just in a different way. So I was thinking, so how is this thing played out in my own mind? And in a sense, suddenly it was just so obvious. That is basically that whenever there's some kind of stimulus which we receive through eye, ear, nose, tongue, body or mind, we receive that kind of input, and of course we then transform it, or we create it, or we translate it into some kind of message, give it some kind of meaning. And then straight away an instantaneous emotional bidding process takes place, very, very quickly, to more or less decide, how am I going to react to this? So it's often very simple. Do I like it? Do I not like it? If it's something more, say, intellectual or conceptual, it's like, say, like somebody's saying something to you, you're straight away thinking, how am I going to respond to this? What am I going to say to this person? And I'm sure you've had this experience where somebody's in the process of, as they're talking to you, they're in the middle of a sentence, you've already interpreted what they're saying, where they're coming from, whether you like it and whether you don't like it, and you've got some kind of response, and you're already formulating the response. And then halfway through the sentence, you realize, then they end it differently. It turns out to be something completely different. Then you have to sort of dismantle that whole response and then actually come up with something that's more relevant to what's actually been said. Or at least that's my experience. I always find that shocking, that how quickly I'm latching on to concepts or things even half formed, and then creating a whole kind of scenario around that. So sometimes it's clearly false. Sometimes you don't even realize, and you just get the wrong end of the stick. So, but basically, this is what it struck me that this is in a sense what's going on all the time. This process then that we're in, of this very, very quick response to things, and that's basically survival, I think. You can talk about how it works, but it's basically we need to be making very, very quick, very snap judgments, and basically you could say the bottom line is what's more worth my while? Do I go here or do I go there? If it's like it's like fight and flight, friend or foe, like, dislike. Am I going to say this or am I going to say that? And it's very, very quick. And this is very much part of our world. It's our world. It's our life. So hearing the kind of amazing things that are going on, or something like that. This little fact about Google. It's not any different, I feel, to what's going on, or that's the kind of response that arises in me. And so this brings me back to one of the Buddha's statements on, basically on the human condition. And we touched on it a couple of weeks ago in the midnight tea here, where the Buddha doesn't give a starting point for the human condition, but more or less presents a scenario. And one of these very beautiful statements, the Buddha said inconceivable, monks, is samsara. This word, anamatago yang bhikkhave samsara. This samsara is inconceivable, monks. Pubbha koti, which means a first cause. Pubbha koti napanyayati, a first cause cannot be discerned for beings who, bound by ignorance and hindered by desire, or hindered by ignorance and fettered by desire, avijja nivarananam, nivaranas are the hindrances, so hindered by ignorance, and tanha, sanyojana, and fettered by craving, run hurrying and scurrying through this samsaric round. So it's this paradox that you can't find any first cause, because of course a first cause doesn't make sense in a causal process. This has been the great kind of question for in religion and philosophy. You know, how can you start with a first cause in the beginning? It doesn't really make sense. So the Buddha said you can't discern, cannot be paññāyati, cannot be wisdomed, if you like paññā is a verb, can't be discerned, can't be fathomed. You'll never come to a first cause for beings who are running and scurrying and going round in circles through craving and ignorance. And so in a sense, what we do is, what we say is, well, that's our starting point. That is our first cause. It's not a kind of cosmological or a kind of universal type of beginning of starting point, but it's a starting point where we can look at our process, craving and ignorance. And so when we see that, the Buddha was pointing to just that that's what's fueling this whole thing. So that's what we're constantly being fueled by. It's this liking, not liking, and then the ignorance that doesn't understand the Four Noble Truths, that basically doesn't see the process that we're in. So we're kind of like a bit, again, like that blind turtle swimming around, coming up to the surface every 100 years. Very difficult to pop your neck through the wooden ring. So then as a starting point, for some people that's sort of like a depressing starting point. For me, like, I find it quite, you could say quite uplifting or quite practical, because actually it's something I can really see. I can say, oh yes, I experience craving, that is for sure. Of that I have no doubt. I experience that regularly, and more understanding and investigating what that feels like, how it arises, how it manifests, based on what, how these sense bases, i.e. nose, tongue, body and mind work. And then with all of these practices, the whole kind of combined forces of the Eightfold Path and the monastic form and the sutta, the Mangala Sutta, Metta Sutta, cultivating Brahma Viharas, bit by bit, working away at it, getting more and more. And then avijja, also this sense of, oh yes, to realize you don't see clearly. Very simple, the three characteristics. We do take things as permanent. We do see things as sukha, as suffering, as sukha, as happiness or pleasurable, even though deep down we know ultimately they're going to bring us dukkha. And in terms of anatta, we do see things as essences, as solid things, beginning with our own body and mind, our own experience. We take things as realities which are not. So again, just intellectually or conceptually, it's a great place to start, because in a sense just pointing to avijja and looking at avijja in ourselves kind of like shines the light on it, and a bit like when you sort of turn the lights up, the sort of the shadows fade away and something begins to be seen clearly. So it's the starting point. But until we really see, I think, just how quick, just as quick as a computer. I mean, the mind is amazing. The Buddha said the mind is so fast I can't give a simile for it. As you know, the Buddha was supreme giver of similes. Said this one, no simile for it. It's the mind. And as I say, everything that we can experience, we experience through the veil or through the filter, through the sieve. My mind feels more and more like a sieve these days of the mind. Things slip in and slip out. And the more we see that, just how quick it is, just how bound up with craving it is, then we begin to get a sense then of what we're working with, and nothing really surprises us anymore, because we understand, oh yeah, this is what the mind is capable of, and everything in the world that we experience, things which we say, this is so unnatural, that's so unnatural. I mean, essentially everything is created. The things we're talking about are created, by human beings, by us, and we're products of nature, so it's all natural. What we really mean is it's been somehow created and manufactured, sankharas, and often unnatural means we don't like it. So again, it's good to know that that's the emotional response to things, is that a lot of the stuff which we actually create, we end up not liking, because we're moving away from nature. We generally most people like trees and mountains and streams and stuff. But we can't just leave it at that. We then have to turn it into something which we end up not liking. So again, basically very much an external manifestation of how our minds work. We have very simple experiences, very simple raw experiences, sense data, and then we kind of create it into dukkha. So just to share that with you a little bit, our Dhamma practice, so much of it, I think, has to start with this process of slowly understanding how this, not necessarily how it works, but getting clear on the concept, like the way the Buddha said that suffering, dukkha, has to be fully understood. Until we do that, we're not going to make any headway. So it's like understanding the engine under the bonnet, and we can keep it running or fix it if it's broken. So just maybe to say a few things about what's been striking me very much about reading about Luang Chah, and it's obviously linked to this, is this principle of the mind. So as the Buddha said himself, this very famous statement, Dhammapada verse 1, Mano Pubangama Dhamma, Mano Seta, Mano Maya. The mind is the forerunner of things. Mind is the chief. Mind made of things. Mano Maya. Maya means illusion. So the mind literally manifests or creates things. Again, very powerful statement, pointing to the heart of the teachings, the heart of the middle way, pointing us back to the mind, the mental way. The middle way is the mental way, where we not seeking to find some solution through the physical realm of indulgence in sensuality somehow, or the opposite, some kind of physical elimination of our bad karma or whatever. And this is something which Luang Chah just emphasized again and again, and in terms of his teaching to monks and lay people and nuns, what's striking is how little difference there was. The differences, obviously, at times talking to lay people, dealing with things perhaps more relevant to lay life, into the sila, just more or less 5 precepts, 8 precepts on Uposa tonight, as opposed to the whole of the monk's training is a bit more complicated and involved. But the essence is the same, to live a life of ethics and integrity, whereby non-remorse can be present in the mind, non-remorse is the real pathway in then to all kinds of wholesome states of mind. So one side of Luang Por Chah, as you probably heard and you'll read about, it comes across this incredibly fierce, incredibly, the monastery is almost like militaristic boot camp, sort of at times giving real blasting, scoldings, admonishments. It's like anything that was anyone did anything wrong, do something noisily, come a few minutes late, do something slightly disrespectful, fix something not quite right. It's like, okay, Sangha meeting, and lay into the person, or right then and there, if you're nodding, just call out your name, wake up, or if you eat too much, or you eat too quick, or eat too whatever, it sounds like you get a blasting, and so that there can be that flavor. Again, there are reasons for that, many things to do with the culture of the time and the spirit of the times. But what comes across as well is that a lot of the time, a lot of the encouragement to people, and especially for lay people, but also monks, is to give them encouragement that with regard the whole process of, say, training the mind, abandoning defilements, things like sensuality, desire, craving, anger, that it's not something that you can expect to happen and to do very, very quickly. And simply to be close enough or encountering enough of a supportive environment like this one, for example, is already just so, you could say, so fortunate or so beneficial or so meritorious, however you want to put it. So the simile that he gave, one that I just read, was he's talking to people and it's saying, like, if you're disappointed with your practice or you're feeling it's not going well enough, you sit meditation and your mind's never peaceful. It's like somebody who's got lots of plain rice and they don't have delicious curries and sweets. And Luang Por Chah says, just to have plain rice is already so good. You can fill yourself up, you can have a decent meal, you can survive on plain rice. It's like kind of like keep at it. And it's not to neglect what we already have. So, simply the ability to come to a place which is some kind of refuge, and even want to sit quietly and be able to sit quietly and not be impinged or assailed by all kinds of things. Just to see what a start we have already. Just to simply constantly pointing out to people that, when we start practicing, for the most part we have a whole backlog of our lives, thinking and acting and speaking in a very different way. So how can it be possible? How can we expect things to just turn around, as we say, turn around on a dime and just go in a different direction? It doesn't make sense, actually, because nothing in our experience is really like that. When there's a momentum in a certain direction, then it takes time and effort, patience, endurance, and willingness to bear with. So this spirit of patience. So saying that in an encouraging way, rather than saying, oh, this practice is going to take you 50 years or whatever, I wouldn't bother. It's more or less saying, look, this is really worth doing. It's the only thing worth doing. And it's going to take some time. And so getting a encouragement from that, knowing that it's important not to have unrealistic expectations. And then another little example is warning people, cautioning people against, again, having too high expectations or setting too high kind of determinations. And the very famous example, which you may have heard, is Luang Por Chah saying that people want to sit, for like a really long period of time, so they kind of light some incense and put the incense in the holder and say, even if I'm in racking pain and agony and I feel like I'm about to die, I won't move until the incense is burnt down. And then you start sitting and you've got this strong, basically it's craving. And then after a while you're sitting and you start feeling pain, and then you open your eyes and, has the incense burnt down yet? and you look at it and it's hardly burnt down at all. You think, oh no. And you go back to your sitting, and after a few minutes again, surely it must have ended now, and you look again. So of course the whole process, he's saying, is fraught with craving. There's never going to be any ease or peace of mind. And that's partly bound up with unreasonable expectations of ourselves, or setting a challenge or a goal too high, or approaching it with the wrong way. So at the same time as having this very lofty expectation, also knowing where we're at and allowing it to unfold more naturally. But in terms of the actual application, what comes across is that Luang Por wasn't at all shy to keep reminding people that basically to really get on in the practice required constant mindfulness. This comes up. Comes up again and again in the quotes and in the book, whether it's to the monks, to the lay people, to the nuns. It's just like a throwaway line at the end. You've got to be constantly mindful. You've got to keep your mindfulness constant. Keep practicing. These kind of very, very short phrases, but were meant like genuinely. Because when you go back to his life, you're reading about his, in a sense, his struggles, but simply his practice. What he says at one point is that basically you have to be obsessed with it. It has to be an obsession that you really don't want to, you feel you can't put down. And in one really funny moment, Luang Por's again encouraging the monks. He's saying, look, you're all suffering. I know you're suffering so much. And you often think, where's all this suffering come from? And Luang Por says, I thought that I suffered so much in my practice. And I used to wonder, where's all this suffering come from? But I didn't give up. I persevered. I kept contemplating. And then at the end he says, and in fact, now that I think about it, I quite enjoyed all that suffering. So it's this kind of... Again, it comes back to this very simple principle that if suffering has to be fully understood, we basically have to be obsessed with understanding our suffering. So you have to, on one level, enjoy it. So, without wanting to sound like some sort of bizarre, masochistic sort of practice, where it's not like bring it on, cultivate more and more dukkha, and that's not atakila, that would be atakila matana yoga. But it's saying that process which we have, to the extent which we have it, we have to I want to really understand this. I'm going to really see it and really get into the meat of the matter. And the key, I think, was that he seemed to have got very early on that ultimately all it was just suffering. And the worst thing that can happen is that you can die, which you're going to do anyway, so it doesn't matter. So you don't have to add any of those extra thoughts of, oh, this is so much dukkha and it's bad, because, well, that's the way it is anyway. And so it takes a real kind of, I think, like a special mind or a special type of person to really have that insight or that perseverance to do that. But then he more or less shared that with his disciples, and shared that with us. So this is the thing: never to run away from our dukkha. So this comes up again and again, that the premise or the whole framework that we're working with and working on is that this is mentally created, it's based on wrong thinking, and we have the capacity, through analyzing it, through understanding, through going into it, through not being afraid of it, finding strategies to avoid it, trying to sort of eliminate it and suppress it, we can, transform this suffering right here within our own minds. But it takes absolute constant application. The absolute given, or the absolute, what's not negotiable, is of course the starting point, which is ethics or sila or virtue or integrity. because in a sense, that's exactly what it means. It means like living our lives in line with truth, at least in terms of conventional reality, whereby we're fully taking on whatever's real, and we're not trying to twist our experience to somehow suit us. So sila in Buddhism arises from that whole principle of, well, that which is appropriate to time and place, or that which leads to ease and freedom, at least on a basic level. And so that was absolutely clear. Then with that as a foundation, then to keep contemplating. And then how he taught, it's just so striking. You'll have heard this before, but just to remind us that avoiding and consciously avoiding the use of too much technical language, because he'd seen, one, it gives rise to often to arguments and disputes and doubts, because technical language of the mind, is words which are pointing to things which there are no words for. You can't accurately pin down mental states and experiences in something as coarse as conventional language, whether it's Pali or Thai or English. This is the problem of any kind of translation, is that you can never quite capture it, and even the original never quite captured the actual real meaning. So words are only like the finger pointing at the moon. It's not the moon itself. And so Luang Por Chah was very skillful in avoiding that, and then said so. He said, I'm not going to talk about this jhana or that jhana or this mental factor or this upakilesa or whatever, but would often just speak in general terms. As well as then encouraging people to using a little bit of language to understand things like the hindrances, but also things like the mental, the emotional, say, factors of concentration or samadhi. Just a little bit, just enough to give people a taster, like give people a nudge in the right direction. But then the point was that to develop wisdom. So because he'd seen, I think, very clearly just how different people's faculties are, especially regarding concentration, that some people can be very concentrated and have to be careful in that sense. For other people, very, very distracted. But then you can use their thinking to just keep looking, keep contemplating. And what does this mean, this word contemplation? Again, so many ways of doing this. But the absolute key principle is this one of changefulness, meine, which means impermanent, unstable, changeful, not a sure thing, arising and passing away. So using very, very simple language to see that anything that's so fleeting, anything that's so changeful is the word that Ajahn Chah has come up with for meine, or for impermanent, changeful, of the nature to change, basically, constantly changing, something that's changeful. Anything that's changeful, anything that is so fleeting, that cannot be real, that cannot be clung to, that cannot be taken as true or satisfying or anything other than basically be abandoned. And so this is a very direct way of, for example, just working with so many hindrances like doubt, is not to eliminate a doubt on an intellectual level, like, I don't know whether this point is right or that point, or how to understand this point of doctrine. Just see the principle, see the thing that's being experienced as doubt. See that whole process as changeful and basically then pointless or worthless, not worth indulging in. Because you know that ultimately the goal, if you like, or the thing which you're trying to experience is just the peaceful mind. In Thai the word is sangop, which means peaceful. Again, this has been translated as lucid calm, a bit of a new translation of what's usually, the word is the peaceful mind. So lucid calm has this sense of an aware, a clearly comprehending, a very bright type of peace, which is not dull, it's not drowsy. There's an awareness there. But even if the mind is agitated, then that very agitation, that very busyness, straight away used as an object of reflection, as an object of contemplation, just to see, oh yes, in this process, here is the busy mind, here is activity, here is desire, here is aversion, here is liking, here is disliking, hopes, aspiration, all of those things. What's often called, contemplating the mind or contemplating mind objects. And again, this is something which we can absolutely all do. This is not something, it's just a question of just retuning or rejigging our notion of what we need to be doing when we meditate, or how to practice Dhamma, away from attaining some kind of goal to being right with the process, just being right there. And so this is the sort of the establishing of mindfulness of what's going on. So beginning with mindfulness of the body, the course, the kind of simple types of practices. Again, Luang emphasize this for lay people as well. Contemplate constantly, seeing hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin, until you see those things again and again and again. You keep looking at those things, you keep seeing that that's basically what we put together and create into a person. You will always get lost in the conventional designation person, create a sense of self, and boom, suffer straight away. So we can't bypass these body practices, five parts, 32 parts, or the various elements. See it in the traditional way of solidity, fluidity, liquid, heat, and wind or flowing. If we bypass these, then we're always going to be clinging to some kind of essence. So Luang Por would just talk about this very frankly. Especially, you can imagine a scene like this, the one pra night, the observance evening, giving a talk. Basically, it's to the monks and the lay people, viewing everybody as Dhamma practitioners. And he'd say this today. The entire it's one pra. One means day. Pra comes from, actually the Pali is vara, which means something like worthy or noble. And so it entirely means pra. It's the word for a monk. So it's usually translated in English as holy day. But like Luang Por Chah would say, well, all of you come to the monastery on one pra, on holy day or on worthy day, and so you're all like pra. You're all like monks. We're the pra. You're the pra. So speaking to people as Dhamma practitioners. And so not having to kind of have two levels of instruction, just being able to be absolutely direct, and those with the ears and the wisdom and the understanding to get it, could get it. And so that's what's very striking then, is as you go beyond this, then Luang Por would talk about conventions and the absolute very, 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 very clearly. And the extent to which it very much hinges on the present moment, this contemplation of Dhamma, where you can finally put down the proliferation, being right in the present moment, as being where the whole creation of the conventional reality can finally end, through seeing through it. When you're right there in the present moment. And there's one amazing passage that really struck me. The Buddha is saying this present moment has to be understood. Everything arises there. The present arises in the present. The future comes from the present. The past comes from the present. I read that, I thought, I'm going to have to read that again. The present arises in the present, I get that. The future comes from the present, the present leads to the future. What you do now affects the future. The past comes from the present. Said because it's in the present that you experience the past. So again, the principle is you make the present good, you focus on the present, you can't sort out the past, you can't change the past. Our whole relationship to the notion of past and those memories of the past and the whole emotional roller coaster that arises based on the past arises in the present. So the only place to work is in the present. And so again, as you read the sort of the discourses as they're transcribed, it's often a gradual progression through towards, you can actually see, despite the fact that it's all very free-flowing and not planned and kind of spontaneous in one sense, of course it's based on a kind of gradual path of practice, culminating in letting go on an ultimate level. And especially later on in his life, apparently influenced by Zen, then using a lot of the language of Zen, talking about using expressions like no going, no coming, no stopping, these kind of things. Saying when you let go of everything, then there's nothing. And so it's there, it's all there for us to hear, to listen, and then to make whatever we can out of it, to apply it to whatever extent we're able. And just one little sentence can be enough. Like today I read, things are just processes. Nothing should be clung to whatsoever. So just that. So there's this phrase that I heard many years ago. It's been a very nice kind of mantra, which is to focus on the process of experience, not the content. And then there today, just Luang saying, things are just processes. There's nothing to be clung to. Is very similar kind of notion. And so he didn't need to be like a quantum physicist, to know that there's nothing, that anything that solid matter is actually, electrons in this kind of high intensity state of, whatever it is, that these kind of amazing things that you can see now under the microscope or see with modern physics. It was just the intuitive knowing straight away that whether it's the external world or ultimately the mind as we experience it, it's nothing other than a fluid process, and therefore that whole realm of labeling is only a convention, and we're going beyond that. So ultimately, constantly pointing people back towards sukha and dukkha. So this experience of sukha and dukkha. But the main point, I think, the thing that comes across most clearly is the extent to which whatever, you could say, aspect we're applying ourselves to, because we apply ourselves to all these different factors throughout our day and in different times, whether it's a particular path factor, or we're working, we're looking at sila, or we're cultivating samadhi, putting forth right effort. You could say building up our store, basically a store of kamma, a store of intentions and actions, which will then bear fruit. Come back to what I started at, when we in our lives face these constant choices which we're making. So we have this instant mental auction taking place. Where's the bidding? Open the bidding. Are you going to go left, or are you going to go right? What am I bid? Which one is going to be most beneficial? And it's kamma, it's our intention, which is going to, you could say, drive the bidding process. So whatever intentions, actions of body, speech and mind we're cultivating, for this process to evolve, in that right way, in line with Dhamma, what's called Dhamma Dhamma Patipati, practicing Dhamma in line with Dhamma, it takes a constant application. It's not an easy thing, or it's not something which we can do one day and then turn off another day, or do a little bit sometimes and then put down. And all the more so, not just putting down the Dhamma, but at times acting in ways which are ad-Dhamma, which are not Dhamma. We can't expect those things not to bear some kind of fruit. So the bar, in a sense, the standard is raised very high. And that's just simply, you could say, the way it is. There's no getting around that. In the same way that any pursuit of excellence has to have that obsession and that constant application, or that constant vigilance, then so does this Dhamma practice. So that's what comes across very strong. So it's definitely a challenge. It's a call to us to say, look, know what the task at hand, know what it involves. But the aspect of faith is very important. It's not faith in the Buddha. It's not about faith in Luang Por Chah now, and talking about another individual and saying we have faith in that. The faith is in ourselves. All of these factors which are called balas, powers, or indriyas, spiritual faculties. Faith, energy, mindfulness, samadhi and paññā. It's not faith in somebody else. They're all internal. It's got to be confidence in this path of practice which we're experiencing for ourselves in our own minds, through our own understanding. So that's a personal, direct experience. And that's why it's the first of the faculties, the spiritual faculty, or the first of what's called the powers. It comes from that. If you didn't think you were going to succeed in any venture, whether it's traveling to Portland, or getting enlightened, or cooking a meal, you wouldn't do it. And it's that faith, that confidence. But it's not about the external thing, it's in oneself. And so that's what really comes across, is ultimately Luang Por Chah is saying, everyone can have faith in themselves to take this on. And maybe will, because we're all different, it'll manifest, and the path will unfold in different ways for us. But at the very least, like eating the rice, if we lead a life of right livelihood, grounded in sila, at least we can keep ourselves full and alive. That's the basic thing. Happy, and if we're contented with little, we don't have those unrealistic expectations and don't go at something with craving, then we can really also learn how to create something very beautiful. So I've been kind of meandering around a bit, just with a few themes and ideas that I've been very lucky to have been reading and thinking about. And I want to share that with you and really encourage everyone to cultivate this sense of faith in our capacity to lead this path, which is very much swakata, or well expounded. So I'll end this little talk tonight.